So, regarding the training of the mind, we might have discussed in the past how it's not something that you can do directly. And we had that discussion about seeing the signs of the mind, which is not the same as seeing the mind. Colloquially, you might say it that way, but there's a reason why the Buddha said you see the signs of the mind. He didn't say you kind of grasp the mind as you would grasp an object with your eyes or your ears. So in the same way, when it comes to training the mind, it's also an indirect principle. And so that's one of the reasons why, let's say you have like a sensual thought or an averse thought. The natural tendency would be, how do I just think the opposite, antidote it, get rid of it, suppress it, forget about it, ignore it in some kind, but in that direct sense. It's just the content of that perception or image that you have in your mind, you just want to get rid of it in whichever way you can. So that would be the direct way of trying to deal with things, which is wrong because it fails to account for that indirect relationship between you and the mind, which is kind of like you could compare it to an animal, as the Buddha did in the suttas quite often with an elephant. When the elephant is doing something, you just took it out of the jungle and it's rebelling against what you're telling it to do and it wants to go back. You can't just like forcefully, out of some magical technique or something, get the elephant to do what you want right away. Instead, it's by not allowing it to do what it wants. So, as the Buddha would say, tying it down with the leather straps and not letting it go where it wants, that you would indirectly wear away its wildness until it becomes responsive to your commands. So, there's one sutta that I think isn't very well known, even though it very acutely describes this principle of taming the mind. So it's Majjhima Nikaya number 8, and basically it starts with this. It's a monk asks a question, basically saying that, okay, if a monk just sticks to the basics of the training, like the virtue, the sense restraint, is it that his wrong views will be abandoned? And the Buddha says, no, it's not just that. It says a bhikkhu gives up and lets go of these views by seeing as it is with right understanding where they arise, where they settle, and where they operate as this is not mine, I am not this is not myself. So that's the basic principle. And then he says, talks about the 4 jhanas and says a monk might be thinking that because he's attaining those states that he's practicing wearing away. But in the training of the noble one, these are not called wearing away. They're called simply pleasant abidings in the present experience. So that applies to all of the samadhi attainments. And then the Buddha goes on to say, so what is it that, or how is it that you practice wearing away? And then it says, others will be cruel, but here we will not be cruel. Others will kill living creatures, but here we will not kill living creatures. Others will steal, but here we will not steal. Others will not be celibate, but here we will be celibate. So basically goes on to all sorts of unwholesome behaviors that other people might do, but you will not do. Others will be resentful, here we will not be resentful. Here others will denigrate, here we will not denigrate. And so it ends with, others will be attached to their own views, holding them tight and refusing to let go. But here we will not be attached to our own views, not holding them tight, but we'll let them go easily. So it gives these different expositions of the same principle, but the last one really is the most interesting one. It's called the exposition by quenching. in the Pali is parinibbana.
Mm.
And it says, if you're sinking in the mud yourself, chunda, it is quite impossible for you to pull out someone else who is sinking in the mud. But if you're not sinking in the mud yourself, it is quite possible for you to pull out someone else who is sinking in the mud. If you are not tamed, trained, and quenched yourself, it is quite impossible for you to help tame, train, and quench someone else. But if you are tamed, trained, and quenched yourself, it is quite possible for you to help tame, train, and quench someone else. In the same way, a cruel individual quenches it by not being cruel. An individual who kills quenches it by not killing. So it just repeats these same things. It ends with that common, or well-known instruction that the Buddha would give that says, here are the roots of trees, here are the empty huts. Develop jhana, don't be negligent, don't regret it later. This is my instruction. Which he would give that kind of statement usually when he kind of explains something very fundamental to the practice. So, as it says there, there's obviously like a mundane application of what he just said there. That's okay. If you don't understand the Dhamma, you cannot help somebody else to understand the Dhamma. That's one of the meanings of that phrase. But you could also understand it in relation to what we just said. If you yourself are not, and this is, that's the practical application of the sutta. If you yourself are not tamed, trained, and developed, you cannot tame, train, and develop your mind.
Which means that all this hinges on making a distinction between you and mind.
Yeah.
And it seems to me we should start there, clearing up precisely which mind we are now talking about to begin with.
Well, we already had a discussion about it that, not to get too theoretical, but the suttas would make that distinction between mano and citta.
Yes.
And we actually had that talk in the past where we said it defines the purity of mind as when there is sensuality, aversion, the five hindrances internally, there is no, basically with mano, you understand the escape from those things.
Yes.
Even though they have arisen.
So you don't act out by body, speech and mind.
Exactly.
Mano, and that is how then indirectly the citta, which is, let's say, the background to that, can eventually calm down.
Yeah, so we defined that that's kind of the thing that you have direct control over. So initially, breaking precepts, it doesn't matter what raging, feverish desires you have. You don't do what your mind is pushing you to do, and that already would start to highlight that gap. That even though you don't want these things to be there, they're still there, and that kind of points to that aspect of citta is something that's there on its own. It's influenced by your choices, because of course you wouldn't be having those desires if you hadn't been acting in those ways in the past.
Yeah.
So it's not that it's randomly arisen, you're responsible for it, but there is a kind of delay there that you cannot right away just tell it something and expect it to go along with it.
Yeah. So this then shows two things, like one, that it is through virtue, not as an idea, but actually conducting oneself, for example, in accordance with the 8 precepts, that will be a foundation for experientially seeing this distinction between you and mind, citta. Yeah. Because mind wants to push you in one direction, but now you being committed to these precepts, the whole point of those precepts is precisely that they sort of come in between you and your desires, basically.
Yeah, and
which is where the mind's going.
Exactly. So nothing that you might just think about abstractly, no matter how much sense it makes, will actually point you to that distinction.
No, you have to experience that for yourself through committing yourself to those precepts. But now you also mentioned that there is a bit of a delay. So there's also an element of faith here. And so even though, so you see, it might from the beginning not be quite clear why now adhere to these 8 precepts. I'm just dogmatically abstracting all of that. Well, in the beginning that's not necessarily bad, but if you do that with the view that understanding will grow, you have to just take on faith those precepts. And then another aspect of that faith is that you do not immediately, from the point of view of mind, see results, because it takes time for that animal to calm down. But also, we have said earlier that defilements are destroyed simply by not acting out, which is also immediate.
Yeah, so it's layers. So yes, the bodily defilements, the verbal defilements, those are destroyed simply by you not making those choices. And that's why, as the Buddha said, even at the beginning of the training, if somebody has kind of an understanding of that virtue, they would be able to gain a degree of ease and peace from just that. Doesn't mean that it's going to be enough for the right view, but they will be able to recognize, yeah, even though I may have these desires in my mind, just the fact that I no longer have to act by body and speech. Just imagine that. Just imagine, like, you have a whole entire universe of things going on in your mind, but you never, ever act out of them by body and speech when they're unwholesome. How many problems would be avoided just on account of that?
Yeah.
So, so then the point there is, there's obviously that dimension of precepts and coarse behavior, but when it comes to the mental dimension, that's when people would usually think that somehow that's different. For that you need concentration technique or something. But it's actually the same exact principle, just that, as you said, there is that delay, and there needs to be that element of faith to a degree. Like, you cannot be expecting immediate results, because, well, the only immediate result really that's going to come there is that you put the animal to sleep, so you're not training it. That's usually what
with the concentration techniques.
Yeah, exactly. So you just put it to sleep. Of course, it stops making noise. It stops, destroying whatever is in its path. But the point is that doesn't train it. So that's exactly why then, as soon as you stop, it doesn't matter how calm it was. It's going to go back to the way it was before, sooner or later. So instead, you need to give up that whole attitude of just immediate kind of appeasement of the animal, because even like with like a child or something, if your mechanism of getting your child to behave is to buy the toy that it wants, that works for now, but it's not a long-term good parenting strategy, let's say. So same with your mind. You can have sensual desire, aversion. So of course, the fact that you don't, that's where usually people don't have the nuanced thinking to recognize that it's more subtle than just, okay, so I don't get rid of it means like I just allow it to be there.
Yeah, so there is something in between the punishment and reward mentality.
Exactly, yeah.
Like, you don't reward it if you want it to be quiet, nor do you punish it if you want it to be quiet, but rather you have to endure whatever mood the child might be in.
Yeah.
But if you don't have punishment and reward, then what are you going to do? Well, recognizing that it is a human being capable of understanding things, you could, for example, point out the consequences of behavior that is undesirable. Then the child can come to the conclusion for itself that it is better to not do that. And then also, with that, it becomes more independent rather than just mirroring something, hoping for a reward.
Yeah, and in that teaching relationship, you would need to not be like, shouting and angry and flustered, because that doesn't help. Like, it's gonna start doing stuff out of fear, not because it's actually understanding what you're saying, but but just because, okay, I wanted to calm down, so I'm just going to do what he's saying. But that's not really how you get someone to see the harm of what they're doing. So in this case, going back to the example, you have a thought of ill will. What is the natural strategy to get rid of that? I just start forcefully. For you, it might not feel forceful, but from the ultimate point of view, it is. You start thinking thoughts of metta, thoughts of goodwill, thoughts of loving kindness, which in the surface are kind of good. Like, these are the things that you would want the mind to incline to, but you don't realize that you're kind of force feeding those things to the mind. So you yourself are not like, you're not stable. You're not equanimous to what's going on. You're still fundamentally acting out of craving there, just to get rid of this displeasure as quickly as possible. And like, that is what you're actually communicating to the mind. Even if these thoughts are good on the surface, the point is you are acting out of craving. So that's why it says there, how do you wear cruelty away? How do you wear anger away? How do you wear anything?
Yeah, not by telling fairy tales, but by you yourself not acting out of those states.
Exactly, but not just fairy tales. Like, not even by being kind do you wear away the cruelty. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't be kind. Like, doesn't mean that kindness is bad. It means that it's kind of secondary. You're wearing away the cruelty only when, while there is a cruel mind, you're not acting out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But the natural belief would be like, no, I kind of compensate for the cruelty by fabricating more kindness, by turning up the volume on the kindness. But, if that's what you had to do, then the Buddha would have said it. But very explicitly, everything there is a negative.
Mm-hmm.
So you wear things away by that right endurance. So while the thing is there, you don't act out of it, but you also don't try to get rid of it.
It's like the simile of not opening the door. You know that it's outside, but you don't open nor for fighting it, nor for letting it come in.
Exactly.
So
because you open the door, well, that's exactly, in the end, gives an opportunity for them to come in. If they have a gun or something, well, you open the door, you're done. So that's exactly. But see, that the reason why someone would not be able to do that is because of that innate kind of expectation of how do I solve it as quickly as possible. So you can't just stay inside your room hearing that noise of the person knocking outside. You need to get them off right away. And that's why then you're not able to tame your mind, because you yourself are not patient. You yourself are not equanimous. So that's another one. Like when this idea of like equanimity, that people would think that's something that you can just do, but really it's not. It's the what you want is not for you to be equanimous. What you want is for the mind to be equanimous. In other words, that regardless of your choice, regardless of you having to say like, oh, I have no preferences. No, what you want is the mind itself, not like that it's unable to crave in the face of pleasure or
so
the face of pain.
So the equanimity is basically the mind or the wild animal being fully tamed. So it is the result, and that mind being indirect means that equanimity is not something that you can do. The closest you can do is to endure these unwholesome states, which, if you perfect that, will result in an equanimous mind, which isn't moved in the first place. So then you don't need to be too concerned. This is similar with these cow herds. Like, you can just have these cows walking around. You have to watch them, but they don't go in the field and start eating crops, and then you get punished on account of those cows doing that.
Yeah, and you would see that actually, because fundamentally the mind is not yours. So it's not that we're saying like, oh, your mind is your true self or something like that. So actually, it might seem like you just have to postpone everything because you cannot be equanimous. But no, like, it is a form of equanimity. The right one, actually.
You mean to endure?
Yes. For you to have those mental states there and see actually that's what it says there. You overcome all these views by seeing the place where they arise, where they originate, where they endure, as this is not mine, I am not this is not myself. Yeah. So that's the right level for you to see anatta. It's where that mind is, trying to push you towards these views or towards these tendencies, not trying to get rid of that. So that's how you get to see this is not mine, because, if you truly had the view that it's not yours, then why are you trying to get rid of it?
I was just going to say, so it actually already is, as that Sutta is saying, or as you are also saying, that mind is already not yours, but that doesn't mean that the problem is now solved by just stating that.
Exactly.
Because it is on account of acting out that the appropriation continues. So it's already not self, but in order to actually see that, one needs to stop acting out, because the acting out is the regarding of it as mind.
Yeah, so if in the future, if you, as much as you might want to state that it's not yours, in the future you continue to be driven by the tendencies of that mind, then it is yours. Like, why else would you be following? Yeah. You're identified with it to that extent.
So you need to be, yes, because, and this is where the right mindfulness comes in, because you need to keep an eye on what that mind is up to, because if you don't, then you will by definition be acting out, because that's the starting point. So it's not neutral. No, there is already, let's say, the conditioning or the ignorance, which is just acting out, which is how the appropriation continues. And to end that is a question of not acting out, so that it can be seen as it was always already not mine, but that needs to still be attained or acquired due to the sufficient not acting out, let's say.
Yeah, and it's not that it would be like a matter of you catching some hidden moments of consciousness that you couldn't see. It's just asking yourself in the broad scale of things, like in my day-to-day, are there things that I still do that are pushed, that are imposed on me by this mind, through which I am still giving it the power to decide. In other words, keeping it wild. So that's how you would continue to push that mindfulness further, not by like moment to moment trying to catch like hidden thoughts or something, because see, all of that now is going to be based on another pressure of the mind that you will not be seeing. So that's another thing. You can't just pick random things and say, I will endure this. That's why we started by mentioning the sign of the mind. So all of those practices of wearing away would require you to be able to discern pressure as pressure. Like, where is the pressure now, actually? Because usually in the beginning, especially if you haven't been keeping the precepts for long enough and stuff, it will be like your idea of where the pressure that should be endured is going to be hit or miss. So you're going to be anticipating that it's here when really it's something else. Like when people would be sometimes thinking that just, forcing themselves to go through like austerities and ascetic practices, as they did in the Buddha's time, thinking that no, the tameness is when I finally am able to just go through this like a soldier or something, failing to see actually the pressure is the whole desire of you wanting to do this in the first place, because of which you get angry when others tell you that you shouldn't do it or something. So that's why it's important to recognize that yes, the practice is to endure things on the right level, but you need to first have that. You can't just like descend and get absorbed into your idea of what needs to be endured and forget that, no, actually I could be looking at the wrong place. So it's actually more important to just develop first. I mean, that's what the right view is. Develop that view, recognition of what is relevant and what is not relevant, as the suttas would say.
So what are the things that are relevant?
Can you make a list?
Well, broadly speaking, the precepts are a good starting point.
Sure. But once you have that list, is there anything else that you can...
Well, you'd be trying to make a list so as not to, to ignore what needs to be seen.
Exactly, yeah, so basically, that's pretty much, even once you get to the point of sense restraint, which is just the second step in the graduate training, there's already no definition of like specific things.
Mm-hmm.
It says anything that might cause a desire or aversion to arise, you don't attend to it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't give any more specific description than that. So that's the thing. Initially, there will be that tendency to want to overly define, okay, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do this. Fine, on the level of the precepts, that has to be the starting point. But beyond that, even that pressure to define things, like you could question that, like why do I need to always have it perfectly laid out so that I can just do it without... Well, that's because you want to not be mindful, actually.
Mm-hmm.
You want to kind of drop the ball and
Just
kind of
mechanically do something.
abandon your vigilance, basically, and just keep doing this so that you don't have to be aware of where the pressure actually is. And yes, once you, going back to the example I mentioned, because there's often the idea of metta and stuff, and yes, the suttas do talk about it. So we're not saying that metta is not wholesome or anything like that. But the point is, you would reach that point where the mind is naturally inclining towards thoughts of kindness, or compassion, or contentment, or equanimity, not because you force-fed these intentions to the mind with like a mantra of may everybody be well or something like that. That's because you indirectly, as it says, wore away the inclination to be it ill will, cruelty, discontent, or passion. So that's why it says that those are the things that the Brahma Viharas kind of those are the counterparts or the opposites of the four Brahma Viharas. So by wearing away these things, then going back to the example of the elephant, like once you've been holding it down with the leather straps, not force feeding it anything, just keeping it there with those leather straps, not letting it go where it wants to go, at some point it will become pliable. It will start listening, and because it's just going to give up. It will realize, okay, this is hopeless. And then you can actually feed it these things, and it won't be coming out of that desperate kind of just get rid of it as quickly as I can, which is what you would have been doing in the beginning. So once you've been like seeing that separation between, okay, no, these thoughts of ill will are there, as in that sutta that we discussed in the previous talk, and okay, they're there, but my kind of where my responsibility begins, which is through mano, like am I proliferating, am I giving in, am I intentionally adding fuel to this? That part I don't do, and that's it. Just keep it there, and then you won't even have to it will be obvious once the mind becomes pliable. And then yes, you can, as it says there, whether to the east, north, or the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, wherever you incline the mind, you can get it to be just established in an attitude of friendliness that's genuine. Like it's not you pulling the strings and grabbing the animal to force it to move like this. It's the animal by itself actually behaving in that way. So that's a difference between a practice that's based on, as Buddha said, fabrication and kind of doing in that coarse sense, which he said is the characteristic of wrong samadhi. So right samadhi is basically when there's no active kind of manipulation of the mind. It's factually pliable by itself.
And you will know that it is like that.
Yeah. So you that's why the whole idea of like, I need to keep focusing on this, because as soon as I just lapse, it's gone. Well, that shows you that that's not pliability. That's just you kind of playing this balancing act where the just for 1 second the animal is quiet, but as soon as you look away, it's going to go back.
Yeah, that cannot be the right kind of confidence. You need to be continuously on the ball, and that's just practically impossible. You become super dependent on some sort of precious environment.
Yeah, exactly.
And then if that collapses, you realize that you're basically back where you started.
And it will eventually collapse anyway.
Yeah.
So the Buddha would often describe that permanent liberation. He would describe it as unshakable liberation of the mind. That's the expression that he would use in the suttas. So that's exactly why it's not something that you need to maintain, because once that animal has been trained to recognize what is for its benefit and what isn't, you don't even need to be consciously hitting it or yelling at it or like you used to before. So then genuinely it would be just coexisting with it peacefully until, as the suttas would say, until the body breaks apart. So that's pretty much how. It's not that an arahant needs to be perpetually like in this moment to moment of observation to or like that whole view that's involved with these meditation techniques. Usually that the abandonment of craving happens through you being in the present moment every second. So that entire thing is still within the same overall framework of you not having control over the mind and just needing to keep it tied down as hard as possible, because any just 5 seconds you let it move around, it's going to go back.
Yeah, so that's the view still all the way from the beginning, needing to have these leather straps and tie it down. But then somebody has never moved beyond that.
Yeah, so you delight in tying the animal down.
Yeah, which is a bit a perverse attitude, which is where the sutras speak about like self-modification, maybe. So, but if that's done with the right perspective, recognizing that this has to be the first step, it might be correct, but one definitely wants to grow out of that, because that's not yet the actual education of the child or the taming of the animal. That starts when it is somewhat listening to your instructions. Then you need to know how to communicate and basically have the right relationship with it.
Yeah, so you would have to gauge progress in your practice to by the standard of, am I actually able to just drop this constant need to rein the mind in and move it here and move it there.
Or can I let go of the precepts but without breaking them?
Exactly, yeah.
Right? So can you untie these leather straps but without that elephant rushing back into the forest?
Exactly. So, because many people factually, even after decades of practicing, they may not realize that this entire time the only reason why they can have peace is because those leather straps are still there. So they wouldn't realize, actually, it's not being trained. It's just like momentarily being kept under control. So, and it might even be waiting. It might have even understood that those leather straps, because oftentimes people keep the precepts conditionally and stuff. Like they themselves know that they're doing this only for the peace of meditation or something, and then once that's gone, all this gets pushed aside. So the animal knows that only for these 10 days is it going to stay tied to the leather straps. After that, it's just going to go back. So that's why it's important to because that only then are you actually, as the Buddha said, is the complete stilling of appropriation, which is basically nibbana. Only when you're not involved at all in the movements of that mind, not out of the initial kind of perverted view that you just start saying, "Oh, this is not mine," while very much the entire range of unwholesome behavior is still there, but you're just denying it. No, it's after you have done this training, and factually the mind doesn't incline to greed, aversion, and delusion on its own anymore, then you can rightly say, "This is not mine."